Alright. Hello, class. How y'all doing? How's everybody doing? Hope everybody's doing good. Staying safe and sound at the comfort of their homes. So, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 9, the Market Revolution. Um, Last time we left off pretty much with the ending of the War of 1812. The War of 1812, although technically a success for the U.S., since we, for good, kicked out the British, was not really that great. The terms that we got the treaty for were not that great. Henry Clay is one of the main negotiators that we sent out there. Treaty of Ghent, and Ghent, Brussels. So I went to Brussels this time, and not Paris. Went to Brussels to settle the beef out there with Britain. Canada got their independence. I mentioned last time. Um, Europe finally left their outpost. Finally left pretty much North America for good. Uh, but one of the most important, I guess, aftershocks or after effects of the War of 1812, of the end of the War of 1812, is American shipping was thus opened up again. Um, Even during the War of 1812, American shipping was pretty important for both the warring parties, for the British, the even well, before the War of 1812, I must say, American shipping was really important for British and for the French, especially during the Napoleonic Wars, when France and Britain were duking it out. Um, so this American shipping, right? And when I talk about American shipping, you got to think about it three in three processes, three kinds of American shipping. When I talk about shipping, is ships going in and out from America, American shipping. The first kind is the export-import type. So you're pretty much exporting American goods, such as wheat, rice, indigo, tobacco, uh, and then later on, cotton becomes a main thing. Cotton, right? For like shirts, cotton. So we're exporting that, all those goods, to Europe, and in return, we're importing, right? So the first process is import export. So the import part is we're importing European goods, namely manufactured goods, goods that are already done, they're already finished, as opposed to like raw goods or raw materials. We're importing manufactured goods and we're exporting over there basically the raw stuff. This is basically the main thing of shipping here. The first main process of American shipping, or characteristic or kind of shipping. The second kind of shipping is re-export type of shipping. So what does this mean? To re-export stuff. So it's carrying goods between two foreign ports um, with an intermediate stop. Right? So you're going, say, from London to let's say Saint Domingue in the Caribbean. But you make a pit stop in Maine or in Vermont, what would later become Vermont, or somewhere in the South, in South Carolina or something. You know, the intermediate stop is going to be the U.S. And that's one type of export of shipping, American shipping, that American ships were involved in this whole Atlantic trade system of carrying goods between two foreign ports with an intermediate stop in the U.S. And why would people stop in the U.S. intermediately, and why not go directly to say to the Saint Domingue? The reason why people would stop, merchants uh, would stop, was often to avoid French and English embargoes, or often to avoid taxes, tariffs. Okay. So it was like a loophole, right, And then the third kind is just simply carrying trade for other uh, foreign powers. So pretty much like renting yourself out, being the shipper, right, for another empire at this period. Mostly, namely, really just France and Britain. So you'll be contracted by British merchants to do the shipping for them, or you'll be contracted by French um, Republicans or whatever be the case to do the shipping for them. Okay, so those are the three kinds of American shipping that Americans were involved in the transatlantic shipping. And then, oh, actually, there was a fourth kind, of course, right? This is more like commercial stuff. Um, and I guess commercial and biological here combines with slavery, right? But by 1808, slavery, the transatlantic slave system, was supposed to be outlawed. Nonetheless, it still continued. Basically, what happened is that the Supreme Court, to avoid any conflict between the states, left it to the states. So, say you're an American shipper, or you have a ship full of slaves, and you get caught by the, I guess, not the Coast Guard, but basically by customs back then. You get caught, and they leave it up to the states to see what happens to you and to the slaves. So if you get caught by, like, say, New York authorities or like New England authorities, more than likely you go to jail for a little bit or pay a big fine, um, and then be let go, and then your slaves will be let go. But if you get caught, say, in, like, you know, I don't know, South Carolina in the South somewhere, more than likely you'll be nothing would happen to you, right? And the slaves would be sold. So yes, uh, the transatlantic slave trade system was outlawed in 1808 in the U.S. nationally, but the enforcement of that law was left to the states. So each state kind of enforced it differently according to their own economic benefit. So that's one of the effects of of the aftermath, right? One of the aftermath of the War of 1812. The good thing of the War of 1812, I guess, is that it reopened up this American shipping again, uh, and accelerated more. And to go with it was the mechanization of farming and transportation and and not and communication, not tele, just communications. I'm sorry. So this growth, right, of overseas shipping, um, spurred the development of business services, uh, particularly like in these port cities. So now you have a lot of shippers going in and out of the city, so you have to account for that, and you have to finance that stuff, and you have to find workers and stuff, or sailors and captains for this stuff, and the crew members, right? So the business service started to grow. So what I mean by the business service is like managers and labor contractors, and see what else can I think, and clerks and accountants to keep up with the books and stuff like that, right? So this professional class, middle class, is starting to arise as well as an effect of this regrowth, right? This rebirth again of overseas shipping. So, for example, real quick, by 1810, there were more than 100 banks within the nation. Most of these banks were also corporations, special state charters, which gave them special legal rights and obligations. Uh, so there was three main forces overall that captures this era here from 1800 to 1840, 1854, around there. So the chapter really talks about 1800 to 1840. Um, so the three main historical processes is this spread of American shipping, which really is part of this bigger process of the spread of market relations. So this growth of American shipping has a ripple effect throughout the nation and spreads market relations. And then we'll talk about market relations right now. It also has a ripple effect in this other bigger historical movement that's going to go beyond just 1840, and it's going to go all the way, even kind of even to today. Is this westward movement, westward expansion, captured in this beautiful phrase, or not beautiful, brutal phrase, depending on what you think about, whatever interpretation you want to take on this history. Many of you have heard this before, called. I'm just tripping on the screen here. I can't see my eyes. Manifest destiny. Right, so first we have the spread of market relations. Right. We have westward movement, westward expansion, and then finally we have this rise of this very rigorous political democracy embodied in one man, Andrew Jackson. But that's going to be chapter 10, though. So for this chapter, we're going to just focus on the first two big main historical processes that happened during this time period from 1800 to 1850, más o menos. So market relations, the changing market relations, which also changes the culture and the society, and then this expansion towards the West, and the creation of the West. All right. So the market relations, I just talked about American shipping. Right? So what made American shipping so important and so, I guess, unique? In a sense, not really unique, but what enabled this growth of American shipping, and what enabled this bigger process of changing market relations? Technology, really. Right? Now we're talking about the very early period of the industrial revolution. So I'm talking about the business services, mechanization. There was a demand for these American goods, for wheat. There was a demand later on about cotton. This demand was so tremendous about cotton that it spurred this mechanization of production. So in the countryside, a lot of farming families uh, shifted from being like self-sufficient, so just farming for themselves and maybe for a little bit for their own little local farmers market. From that model of self-sufficiency, this Jeffersonian model of the yeoman, this self-sufficient farmer, that Thomas Jefferson was all about, the Republican model. That model shifted during this time period because of this effects of American shipping being more readily available and this demand for more raw cotton and tobacco and indigo to a more commercial way of farming. It's this commercially oriented enterprise now. It's not a family that's self-sufficient now. Farms are not going to be not just for themselves and for the local little markets, but markets out there in New York that are connected to London and Europe. So now these little small farms are going to be replaced by commercial farming, which we now call nowadays agribusiness. So large-scale farming. This large-scale farming was only made possible by, again, the mechanization of production. And what I mean by right, so we have a lot of, I guess, inventions that happened during this time period. And I'm going to start with agriculture, and then I'll go into I guess, the more exciting things like roads and stuff, railroads. So agriculture, the big important events in 1793, Eli Whitney invented, what is it called? What's it right here? Gin. The cotton gin. Right, of course. He invented many things, but one of the two of the things that we're going to talk about here in this lecture is the cotton gin. So in 1793, because of the demand for cotton from Britain, this raw material, cotton. So let me give you guys a little backstory of cotton. Cotton is so fascinating. It's very similar to sugar um, in its way of, in its relation to slavery. Basically, replaced sugar or competed with sugar. Uh, so remember we talked about South Carolina. Uh, that was rice empire. It was all about rice, the plantations there. And then we talked about um, where else? Virginia, tobacco. And then towards the New South, I guess we could talk about like Georgia, Alabama, that area, we had indigo. But by 1800, 1803, um, definitely by 1800, all these um, cash crops, rice, tobacco, and indigo, were declining. In South Carolina, the soil was being depleted because of overcropping the rice. In Virginia, the same thing was happening. The price of indigo failed worldwide, so not too many people were buying indigo no more. So all these cash crops were not really cash crops anymore. So the economy of these three crops was failing, and then we found out that cotton grows perfectly well in all these three areas. The only problem with cotton, though, was that it has these very nasty seeds that are like kind of pointy, and they'll cut you if you do it by hand. It's a really labor-intensive process to get the fibers, to get the cotton, essentially, to make clothes and whatnot, from those seeds, from 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 the bud of the cotton flower. Um, so that was labor intensive and it was not profitable until 1793 and onwards. So in 1793, Eli Whitney, let me see if I can write this down really quick for y'all because this is pretty damn important. The spin engine or the cotton engine. Basically, what this machine does, it's a just takes away the seeds from the fiber. It's like a brush and some. So take two brushes together. You put the cotton, and the fiber comes out, and the seed stays in there, kind of like a filter, mechanical, and it rolls and stuff. It's pretty um, and it made a tremendous impact on cotton production. So, for example, in one day, by hand, before this invention, the cotton gin, you would only do 1 pound of cotton to take it out from the seed. It was that intense, the labor. Uh, to 50 pounds after with this machine, right? So, so it just like exponentially, it just uh, fueled the production of cotton. So pretty much like overnight, basically, right? This invention by Eli Whitney made cotton a viable cash crop when it wasn't before. So cotton becomes king, basically. And this is what you have here in your textbook here, the cotton kingdom. This is totally spurred on by the Industrial Revolution, by this technological invention of the cotton gin, which was fueled, though, by demand of cotton overseas, by Europe. So let me give you some statistics that are pretty impressive, I think at least. Between 1790 and 1810, American cotton production increased from 3,000 bales to 178,000 bales a year. By 1800, cotton was the largest single U.S. export. And I guess I'll just finish this nice little, I think this one is a different book here. Making the development of cotton, this production, this increase of production of cotton, made the development of the nation, not merely only the South, but the whole nation, dependent on cotton and its labor system, which was slavery. So cotton uh, integrated North and South economically. So this is what would happen. You grow the cotton in the South, and then somehow you have to ship it internally within the U.S. to the North, to the ports, either New York or Philadelphia, those two main ports that had connections to London and the textile companies, big textile companies out there in London, fashion companies as well in London and in Europe that wanted cotton. Um, so that's how the way it worked pretty much. So demand was from Europe, and then the South, you grow the cotton, and then you take the cotton up to the ports, big ports, New York City, Philadelphia, and you ship them out back. So this big triangle again, right? When you have, but instead of being rice or tobacco now it's cotton, right? Making shirts. So when we were expecting, people thought that American slavery was going to die out because the rice and tobacco and the indigo economy was dying as well. And then all of a sudden, we got cotton and completely revamps and revives American slavery. So let's talk about the shipping internally, how to move goods and people within the nation, which is pretty important stuff here. Right, so this is also another important part of this technology that was mainly driven by this demand that was opened up by this rebirth of American shipping. And, that was one of these main historical bigger processes of the changing market relations that was brought about by the end of the War of 1812. So, so obviously one of the first ways to transport goods and people, um, well, overland or within the U.S. was overland, right? We roads, very rudimentary, very old and rutted old roads that we had. The first like big roads that were commissioned and completed and constructed, whatever, were local or state initiatives or private initiatives. It was not the national government that was responsible of roads. And more or less, that's kind of less still how it is. Local taxes and state taxes, for the most part, are responsible for local and state roads, and then you have the interstate system, just national stuff. So we have roads. So we have this thing called turnpikes. So who's going to pay for this? Right? So turnpikes. That was the way to like these engineers and these politicians were thinking about it. And turnpikes are just like toll roads. You have a toll road. So in here we have a brand new toll road. That's pretty convenient. So you have toll roads, or up there in the north, we call them turnpikes. Same thing. You're supposed to pay a fee, then you be able to use the road, which is supposed to make it more convenient, more safer for shipping your goods, whatever you need to ship across states or across regions or whatever. However, these roads were not efficient, at least money-wise. They were not profitable at all. A lot of people would create what we called shunt roads or shunt pikes. Basically, so you have a toll road or you have a turnpike. So say this is, I don't know, Baltimore, and over here you have New York. So you have a toll road, you have a toll here. You have to pay, I don't know, whatever money they ask. A shunpike would be a road over here in the little town. You go around it, and then you shun it, right? You just go, you don't pay the toll, and then you go on your way to New York City, right? So these roads were not efficiently profitable at all. Only one of these turnpikes actually made profit. Besides, all of them were just not profitable at all. Um, Let me see which one was. Let me tell you which one was it. The only one that made a profit was just a really short toll road in Connecticut. That there was no way to make a little shun, a little shortcut around it. All the other ones, you know, didn't make no profit at all. The only good thing about these toll roads, these private initiatives, were that it spurred bridge building. So a lot of these roads had bridges, and that was very, very, very useful. It did cut a lot of transportation time, and they made transportation more efficient. So bridges were tremendously very a good consequence of these turnpikes and these toll roads. So obviously, with these bridges, a smart guy will put a toll right there on that bridge, right? And that is the case to this day, right? If you go to New York, we use these bridges, right? The Brooklyn Bridge, the Washington Bridge, you're gonna have to pay a toll. Um, Another technological application that tremendously changed the market relations within the nation was the steam engine. And to be sure, the steam engine's been around for a while. We've messing around. People have been messing around with the steam engine since the late 16th century in Britain. Um, as a matter of fact, you know, a lot of Britain had like the upper hand in the Industrial Revolution. It first happened over there, in Manchester, England, and with textile companies manufacturing, and they basically outlawed patents and the blueprints of these steam engines and all these technological advances. So it was illegal for these operatives and these, I guess, engineers that used to work in England to migrate to the US or to anywhere because they were afraid for them to steal this knowledge of how to create these steam engines and stuff. Of course, it's really hard to maintain ideas and contain ideas, so this did spread. Right, so it first started off in England, and then slowly it spread around and around the world. In the U.S., we have a really good example. All right, first we have this guy Flitch that first had a bright idea, very ingenious idea of just put a steam engine on top of a boat to see what the fuck happens with two paddles. And it was pretty brutish. It didn't work out at all. Right, he put it in the Hudson River, and it was not efficient at all. Right, it's Jonathan Flitch, 1790 something. Uh, First of all, he was not very a good builder. He was not a good engineer, and he did it on his own. He had no financial backing really. He was kind of wealthy, but he was not right. He didn't have no sponsors. Right, he had no patrons. But this other guy, also from Pennsylvania, from like this guy Flitch, this other guy Robert Fulton, however, this guy was a better engineer. He was a better builder, and he had a lot of financial backing from the Livingstons, this really rich family there, and really well politically connected family, and really wealthy family uh, in Pennsylvania, the Livingston. Uh, Robert Livingston. The way he knew the Livingston is that this guy Robert Fulton, this engineer, who I guess modified and made the steamboat. Basically, what I'm talking about here, the steamboat. So we have Fulton and the steamboat. He married one of the daughters of this Livingstone family. Right, so pretty smart guy. So he had all this financial backing. So he made a ship, a steamboat. He called it this is the name of the boat, North River Steamboat of Claremont. So this North River Steamboat of Claremont, right, puts it in the Hudson River, and this guy goes from Albany, New York, to New York City, about 150 miles. Does it fucking quick. Right? Let me see. He did it in. I ran it up. This is his quote. I ran it up in 32 hours and down in 30. So between 32 and 30 hours, right? I guess let me see. Let me give you an idea. The Claremont. I mean, before that, it would take you so 30 days, 32 hours. It would take you at least 50 days to go uh, such distance. Now you cut it to like 2 days, right? So big fucking difference, right? I'm saying fucking fast, right? And I'm talking about fucking fast. He's going like maybe at the most 10 miles per hour, right? But people had never seen that shit before, right? Fucking fast. He's like fucking going fast, and besides going fast now, you don't have to depend on the wind currents. You don't have to depend on sails, right? Now you have steam powered engines, so you go upstream, downstream, you go anywhere you want, right? So that was a big innovative change, right? This Robert Fulton and his steamboat, right? The Claremont, the North River Steamboat of Claremont. So by 1815, there were about 300 something steamboats up and down the Mississippi River and its tributaries. Before that, there was not even none, right? So within a couple of years, within like a decade, you get this whole bunch of people just rushing uh, and using the steamboat. It's really important shipping process. So now you go upstream anywhere, but you're still tied to by nature, right? It's only by the river, right? So whatever navigable river, that's as far as you can go. But no, fuck no, right? We're Americans, so we're not gonna stop there. So say the Mississippi River ends somewhere, we're gonna create a canal where our steamboats could go through and reach another uh, body of water, whether it's a river, or whether it's a lake, or whether it's an ocean. And so one of the perfect examples of these canals, this man-made, pretty much a man-made river, right, to get these steamboats, namely to get shipping and to get commercial goods and to get people across more easily, more efficiently, uh, was the Erie Canal. Uh, pretty fucking tremendous endeavor, the Erie Canal. It was completed. It was begun in 1812, I think, or 1850, in the teens, 18 teens, and completed in 1825. The Erie Canal. Let me see. So yeah, right at the end of the war, 1812, we have Dewitt Clinton, the mayor of New York City. Dewitt Clinton is mayor of New York City. He asked for $7 million, all state funded, to construct this super massive freaking canal that's going to be a whopping 364 miles long. Longest man-made canal in the world in history ever. Right? Uh, Pretty much more work than building the goddamn pyramids in Egypt or anywhere for that matter. It's 364 miles, the longest canal in the world. This whole elaborate system of aqueducts and locks. Uh, just it would it's $7 million to cost. Uh, the largest investment by the state in the history of the U.S. Uh, According to DeWitt Clinton, the New York, it would make New York City the granary of the world, the emporium of commerce, the seat of manufacturers, the focus of great moneyed operations. And he was right. It did New York City did become that, right? The seat of commerce. Still is, arguably, to this day. So so basically it connected the Great Lakes area, Albany, New York, to New York City. Right, so all this fertile farmland had a direct access now to the big port city of New York City, to the market, right? Access to the transatlantic market. Uh, and one of the consequences is, of course, a lot of fucking people died making the Erie Canal, and it's named because of the Lake Erie. But a lot of people died. It was tremendously back-breaking work. Um, as a matter of fact, people had to invent machinery as they went along. There was no engineers in the U.S. at the time to create such an engineering feat. Um, the people in charge, besides the the major of the mayor of New York City, Clinton, was two lawyers, and they had to learn engineering on the spot as they went along. They had to create big machines to dig shit up, and it was it's pretty impressive actually that they got it done. But they got it done. Took a lot. It took about 7 years or 10 years. I don't know. $7 million. A lot of lost life. A lot of workers lost their lives there. But one of the consequences was that a lot of cities began sprouting up along this canal, this 364-mile stretch. So cities like Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, New York. So all upstate New York became developed, and so a lot of this attracted a lot of migrants coming from Europe, namely Irish and Germans and Scandinavians at this time period. And a lot of them settled there. Mostly the Germans and Scandinavians settled along that stretch there. The Irish tended to settle in the urban because they were more low skilled. They were farmers and low skilled, and they didn't have the means to go out and get their own land. Whereas Germans and Scandinavians, they were more, I guess, like higher skilled workers, so they did have the means to go deeper west, right? To go across the Appalachians and into this upstate New York, right? And get a piece of land themselves. So the Erie Canal and DeWitt Clinton, super important project. The next technological advancement, I was going to talk about land, but before I talk about land, the next technological advancement that also spurred the Industrial Revolution and completely transformed market relations here in the U.S. is, of course, the railroads. Uh, Same concept with steamboats, right? So we have a fucking boat, that's like either a sailboat or one where you have to paddle. And before we put a steam engine on it, like Flitch and Fulton did, um, you had to go downstream or wait for the winds, right? Or both. So now you have a boat that has a steam engine. You go up and down, and now we have canals. We're like, wow, this is so much efficient. It's really cutting down the price of shipping, and it's making just developing the country tremendously. And people were like, well, let's do this. with with wagons, right? And of course, England was ahead of the game. England already had a couple of 100 miles of railroads already, but the same thing, right? There was laws that were against us getting those blueprints of how to do it. So the same thing by 1828, however, the first true long distance railroad was built in the U.S. and this was the Baltimore and Ohio uh, Railroad. It was the first commercial railroads. Before that, there was a bunch of little ones that were like local or regional, and they were passenger. But the first commercial railroad was in 1828, the Baltimore and Ohio. Let's see. Here. Okay. And so, which is funny because once the railroads were completed, it pretty much made the canals obsolete. So the Erie Canal was completed in 1823. And the next year, we had the first kind of long distance commercial railroad, Baltimore, Ohio. So it went from Baltimore all the way to the Ohio River Valley. Carolina Canal Railroad, let me see, by 1860, uh, we had about 30,000 miles of rails. This outnumbered the number of railroads of the world combined by 1860. Basically integrated, right? Again, the South, the Northwest, the West, and with the whole port cities of New England in the North. Uh, Simultaneously with the railroads, so as you lay track of railroads, uh, they're gonna be sometimes also powered electronic. There's gonna be electricity running as well. You're gonna have also water pits and stuff. You're gonna have also coal, along the way. So a lot of also cities sprout up along the way. But along the railroad track, where parallel to it, simultaneously, as you lay down a track of rail, you have to put poles for telegraphs for this electricity. So the telegraph became a really important, also technological invention for communications. We have this guy, Samuel Morse. Sometimes in the mid 1830s, in New York City, he creates the Morse code. So you can send messages, specific messages, using a code, the Morse code. It's like beep, 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 beep. Kind of in the movies or whatever, in the old school movies like World War II, you use that a lot. You send messages. It's like this machine with a black thing. You just hit it. It depends on the taps, like what message it is. I have no clue how to use that. That'd be really cool skill to learn how to use Morse code. So this is the time that Morse code is being produced, and it's being simultaneously expanded with the expansion of the railroads. um, One of the big consequences of the Morse code, of this telegraph, was that well, first of all, the speed of information was more instant, basically, than before. Before we had the Pony Express, right? It was by mail. Think about the Revolution. We had what's his name? The British are coming. Not the British, but the Redcoats are coming. Paul Revere. Well, you had to go on horseback to spread the news that the Redcoats were coming. Now we could just use telegraph, Morse code, and instantly, basically, almost instantly, you get the message. So the flow of information was cut. Also, I guess prices throughout the country were made more uniform because of this information. It was more readily available. For example, when the War of 1812 ended, Andrew Jackson was down in New Orleans fighting, and it had already ended the war, but he had never heard the news. And even if he did, he didn't give a fuck. He just cared about fighting. But stuff like that now. Now you have instant communication, so more uniformity. Um, the railroads is also synonymous with the rise of the West. So the West has this specific area of the West that we think of it now. Um, so I'm talking about west of the Appalachian Mountains and towards, I guess, our borderland back here will be Louisiana, Illinois, and then that. So that west, I guess the old west, not the west that we think of it now, but the west back then. Okay, uh, that becomes completely integrated with what used to be far-flung areas in New York. So, for example, in 1800, uh, it would take you about to get to let's say Louisville, right around there, or St. Louis, so around basically where the Mississippi River and the Ohio River meet, and that confluence, it would take you about 5 to 6 weeks in 1800 to get there. The distance was 5 to 6 weeks. 30 years later, with the invention of the steamboat and the railroads, and the telegraph, and all this stuff that I just talked about, the time was cut by half or more. 2 weeks at the most it would take you. So from 5 to 6 weeks to 2 weeks. Right? So the world became smaller. So big changes now. Um, Between 1790 and 1840, about 4.5 million people went west. So this is across the Appalachian Mountains. What made this possible? The Treaty of Greenville. So remember the Treaty of Greenville ceded all this native land to American settlers um, on this land between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains. Before that was backcountry uh, Indian land, Indian country. It was dangerous to go settle there. Now that danger was gone. There was no Indians uh, to worry about. The War of 1812 had ended. There was no British people. The British Empire was not there. Napoleon and France were not there either. So Spain was already going in decline. By 1820, Spain will lose uh, uh, most of its, will lose Mexico at least, right? So Mexico will get its independence in 1820. So by this time period, right, 1800 to 1840, right, settling between the Mississippi River and Appalachian Mountains, what was Indian country, it was not Indian country anymore. It was up for grabs. So there was many ways to settle the land. Uh, Here we have the idea of like Daniel Boone, this individual guy going and settling for himself. But that was not the case at all. What was the case was this. So you have a couple of laws that was passed on how to settle lands. So even way back, remember the land ordinances that I talked about last time. In 1785, we have a land ordinance of 1785. So it provided for federal land to be sold off to private individuals with the stipulation that you have to buy by bulk. You have to buy at least 640 acres. It's a fuckload of acres. It's a fuckload of land. You have to buy 640 acres or more. So that was the limit. The at least 640 acres you have to buy at $1 an acre. Uh, so that's $640. That's a whole lot of money back then, way out of the reach of most ordinary Americans, of U.S. citizens. Um, so effectively, all this land that was opened up with the Treaty of Greenville, it was, I don't know how many millions of acres it was opened up, uh, was restricted to land speculators, to these big land companies. Well, these big private individuals had wealthy individuals had a lot of money, and then they would subdivide this land and sell it, for a profit. Charge interest monthly, you know, and then if you don't make your monthly payments, you get kicked out and get more renters, right? So it became a business, right? It became this kind of business, right? It really benefited only land speculators. And this is a tradition, right? This is nothing new, right? George Washington was a land speculator. Jefferson as well, right? So nothing new under the sun here. But this we in Hollywood, I guess, in some movies, you have this view that during this time period when the West was being settled, that's like it's these individuals, these pioneers going out there on their own and taming the West. It was like no, it's not about like the people by themselves. It wasn't even people really. It was these big companies, these big land companies, right? These land speculators, right? Basically Wall Street, right? It's beginnings here, beginnings of Wall Street because of land. So in 1796, Congress made matters worse by raising the price of the acre instead of $1 to $2. So I was gonna do the math here, but I'm about the math. So you guys figure it out how much it would cost. Finally, in 1800, because of a lot of pressure by people, and because of these, the Republicans were in power at this time. Right? We have Jefferson and James Madison, these Republicans here. We have the Land Act. Oh no, why did I do that? The Land Act of 1800. So Congress kind of gets pressured to reduce the size of the minimum parcel of lands, the minimum acreage you have to buy. So now they reduce it from 640 by half to 320. Still a lot of land, still a lot of money, but at least they reduce it. But for the first time, this Land Act of 1800 also gives a payment plan to buyers by the federal government. So now you don't have to go to land speculators. You have the option to go with the federal government. Uh, you know, and the price for acre was reduced from $2 to $1.64. That was the federal cost of an acre of land, $1.64. So that was one way, was through there, through that, legally, you can call it the legal way. Uh, Another way to get land was simply to squatters. So, for example, in Indiana, about 80 or 90% of the population there were squatters. So, what does that mean? The fuck squatter mean? Basically, you just go, you just pick a piece of parcel of land, and nobody's there, quote unquote, nobody, right, is there. You fence it out, put a fence around it, and you develop it. You use it. That's the whole point here. You gotta use the land. You gotta develop the land. So you develop the land and you can make a claim to the land. You're like, hey, you know what? I've been here for 10 years now, 15 years. You can't kick me out. Like, this is my land now. Um, and again, this were a lot of times with land on the state legislatures. So it will go to like a grand jury of your peers. So your neighbors will like be like hardly ever guilty, right? You'll be guilty because it was your neighbors and they'll be in the same boat too. So so sometimes it'll be free, right? They will just give you outright. They will give you just the title for the land. Some like Indiana will do that a lot. Or sometimes, well, what would happen here is that, okay, you've been here, but you have to still buy it. You have to buy the land. So you would buy the land at a very, very discounted price. So you've been there, you're a squatter, you've been in your land there, you think it's your land, you don't have a title, but you're there, you develop it, you have a house, right? You have a well, maybe, right? You have a stable, right, with cows or whatever, right? You have a garden, you have crops, right? You might have slaves even, whatever, right? It's been developed, so the land now costs more, right? It's the value is been developed as well. But if you're a squatter, right, they would charge you. The federal government would charge you the original price, the federal price, $1.64. So that was a hell of a discount. So that was the second option, right? To do that, to go way the hell out west, because nobody developed yet, and just get a parcel of land for yourself, develop it, and then once the federal government came after you, either they'll give it for you for free, just give you a land title upright, right? Depends on your political connections. Or if you did go to court and you lost the court proceedings and you have to pay, you pay the original federal price per acre, which is not what the actual value was. The value is, of course, much higher because you worked on the land. It's worth now more, right? It's a plantation now, for example. It's not $1.64 an acre, right? It's way more now, right? But still, you only pay $1.64. Um, So that was another loophole, right, to go around the land speculator and stuff like that to get land west. This is the rise, the expansion of the westward expansion. This gives rise again to the business service, right, to capitalism, right, where we think about finance, banks, and loans, and debts, or being in debt and stuff like that. So when we think about the West, we think about like pioneers right out there and hunting bears and stuff. Like no, it was more about like banks and like these land companies that tamed the West, all the way up to California, all the way up to the sea. All right, so we got that. The rise of all these states. I think it took like the first. Ohio was like given in 1807 statehood, and it took like 7 years for the next state to be given statehood, which was Indiana, and then right after the other, it's quick succession, which reflects this expansion of population towards the west and the settlement towards the west was Illinois, Missouri, Alabama, Mississippi, Maine, right after the other. Bam, 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 got statehood. When the last one to get a statehood took 7 years, right? So that kind of reflects the amount of people moving westward, the amount of population moving towards the west. So you have new cities cropping up. Cincinnati, Chicago, right? And we're just military outposts, and within 30 years become very important cities, all because of the steamboat, the railroads, and the telegraphs, and cotton, and this demand of cotton, textiles, and raw materials, and being connected now, being integrated to the bigger Atlantic trade economy. And the access points are New York City and Philadelphia. So, so I guess now let's talk about cities. We're talking about cities here. Cincinnati, Chicago, one of the great examples there. They also become really important for like meat packing. Cincinnati is really important for like pork, becomes porkopolis. Chicago is just meat, beef, because it become like hubs. where railroads and steamboats would meet, right, and go on, right. This is where you take where the raw material would meet up and continue on towards New York City and stuff. Um, Big changes happened in the early industrial society of America. Right? This early industrialization. So how do I explain this? So before this, we have like a family economy. So everybody in the family works in the house somewhere, right? Either you go outside and you tend to your chickens, cows, whatever, goats, whatever you may have you. You tend to your veggies, your garden, right? You're self-sufficient here, right? This is the whole Jeffersonian notion of the yeoman, who is self-sufficient, has his own farm, right? This is oh, I can't use this no more. Damn. All right. Right. Thomas Jefferson has this Jeffersonian notion of the yeoman, right? Each person has his own plot of land, and they're self-sufficient, right? They don't need the government to help them out. Everybody does their own, pulls itself up for their own bootstraps. So that's like the original. And then the industrialization comes and changes all that, and becomes commercialized and mechanized. So again, I mentioned earlier, now people are going to factories, to the cities. If you don't own one of these commercial businesses, but they're out there in the farms, commercial farm, or later on now a factory in the city, then you're going to work in these places. So before this, or you were an artisan, right? You made shoes, for example. Let's make an example with shoes to get this point across. You had a shoe, you're a shoemaker, cobbler, and you make a shoe from the beginning process to the end process. You yourself, the artisan, before this industrial revolution, before 1800, basically, you had artisans. They would pay you by the price of your skill, not by a wage, right? Like today, you get a wage, and depending on the hour, or maybe a weekly wage, or maybe a monthly wage, but it's like time. Back then, it was like by skill, by the price of your product, because it was yours. You made it from the end product from beginning to end. Uh, right? Or people in the house were self-sufficient and everybody pitched in. And now you had factories and commercials, agriculture, that people didn't have to do it from beginning to end. All you had to do was operate a machine, know how to press buttons and levers to make one part of the product. So now you didn't have to have the skill to be a whole cobbler or shoemaker. You have to have the skill, enough skill to read, or not to put your fingers in and get your fingers chopped off. Right? So even kids were allowed to work, right? As long as you were able to read, you read the warning signs and read where to press start and stop, what's red and what's green, then you're good. Right? You're good to go. So now we don't need skilled workers. All we need is just people that follow rules. And this is the rise of the early industrial society. Um, Began in New England. So it first began this guy Samuel Slater. I can't. It always fucking fails me. I hope you guys can see this. Samuel Slater, and Pentucket, Rhode Island. So this guy, he was one of those engineers that used to work in England, and he migrates to the U.S. to Rhode Island by claiming that he's just a mere farmer, that he's not an engineer. But this guy memorized the whole blueprints by, I don't know, of how to do of a water powered of steam powered by water of spinning machines or spinning mills. So he memorized by memory and he recreated that in Pentucket, New Jersey, Rhode Island. I'm sorry, Pentucket, Rhode Island. So you have the spinning machines, this for the mills, um, and then he took Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, uh, and created the power necessary, basically, and with water, right? You have to be close to water here, right? So you have big wheels, create water, it creates into the engine, creates creates steam, creates the engine, and it runs this big spinning mills for textiles. Uh, you have this Samuel Slater, the first factory, 1790. Uh, the spinning jetty. That's what I was trying to get at. Couldn't get that word out of my mouth. And it was power driven. So he built that by memory. And this is key, one of the key inventions that drives the industrial revolution, right? The spinning jetty that is uh, steam driven, is power driven. Um, so this completely transformed work. So now you have to go to work to a factory. Um, Back then, even in the early periods, when factories first started, for example, the factory would still have to would have to do what's called outwork. So the factory would create most of the shoe, but the finishing touches would be sent out to a shoemaker, and then sent back to the factory, and they would ship it out. New York City and then London, Europe. Uh, very soon after Eli Whitney, uh, and this system called the American System of Manufacturing, or American System of Manufacturers. Uh, Basically, all production was under one roof of a factory. So now a lot of people, these artisans that were able to stay home, right, and get out work, have now were forced to go to factories. So now life in cities were based upon the factory. We have Lowell, Massachusetts. Also, the Boston Associates, that's what they were called, in Lowell, Massachusetts in 1836, near the Merrimack River. This was one of the first modern textile factories, an example of that everything is produced in one roof. They even had their own housing for their workers and stuff. It's pretty intense. Um, we have the Waltham system, and let me see if I can write this down. How is it? WWA, the Waltham system. This Waltham system is pretty much it was this. It was taking everything, housing the full production of a process from fiber to the finished cloth under one single factory, under one single roof. Now how do you do that? So you have to organize labor and productivity differently. So before being in the hand of one person, the artisan, now you have a hierarchy to make efficiency. So now you have managers that oversee the factories, you have operatives that operate the machines, uh, and it keeps going around the clock, right? And so now the clock becomes super important. So you were an artisan, you had the time, you decided when to work when you were an artisan, or you were a farmer, you were dependent on seasons or the sun. Sun goes up, you have to go and feed the cows or feed whatever and tend to your crops. And the sun goes down, then you go home and work's done, for the day. But now with the factory, it's the machine. The machine now dictates productivity. It's not the humans no more. So now clocks become super important for ships, for different ships and stuff, right? Also, the railroad is a contribution to our conception of time now, from being seasonal in according to the seasons to now according to clock being specific. Right? So now we have a uniformity in conception of time. Right? So now you have to go to the factory at 8 in the morning, and then you get out at 8 p.m. Right? And now you have a specific time period because the machine doesn't stop. The machine's going making these textiles into cloth, into clothing. So you don't choose when to work and when to not. Now you're going all the time. Now you're working for a wage based on the clock. If you don't clock in, you're not gonna get paid. And that's still the case to this day. Right? We work for wages. We don't work for our price and what we're worth, what our skills are worth. Right? We work for a specific wage. And then if you want to get more intense about it, you go read some Marxism and you learn how capitalism works, right? Your price, your value is not worth no more. All you get paid is for your wages. And then that surplus value, somebody else gets paid, which is the factory owner. But I won't get into that because it's a much more complex uh, lecture than this. So the Walton system, right, we have this new organization of, of productivity. We have the managerial class and we have the workers. So we have the rise of the middle class and we have the proletariat. And then you have super rich owners way on top. So this Walton system required employees to live on site, right, to be on time, to work. Uh, and they had subsidized, but it was supervised. They were always supervised as well. Your book also mentions the mill girls. A lot of women will also go and work because women were cheap labor. First of all, for the longest time, women had no rights, at least less rights than men. Think about coverture, the legal principle of coverture. And once a woman is married, she has no way to go into contracts, to negotiate contracts. So, women were very susceptible for low wages. So these big factories, these big industrial factories would seek out women. And this is exactly what's happening today in the maquilas, the maquiladoras in Juarez, right across the border from us in El Paso. And the maquiladoras, they rather hire women because it's a bit more cheaper. And cheap labor is the name of the game here for industrialization. Happened then, happens now. Uh, so you have like matrons, right? That would, this would be same sex, right? You have all the women in the same, uh, I guess, boarding house, and then the males in the same boarding house. But most of these factories were just women working. So you have matrons supervising their everyday activity. And there were strict behaviors about what was womanly, what to expect from a woman. Right? This is kind of like oppressive, but in a way, this was also liberating for some women. Like for the very first time, if you worked in a mill, you were free from like this domestic family life, and then you were coupled with other women in your same position to create like little solidarity. You create like you'll help each other out and stuff. So it was like this little community, right? It was under this oppressive umbrella, but it was like this small community of this where women would read and stuff and get educated minimally, but there was that. But yeah, the clock, right? This is when the clock, when time, according to a clock, became super important with the rise of these factories. Before that, it was just about the sun and the moon and the seasons that determined when it was time to work. Now it was the machine that determines when it is time to work. So the conception of time itself was also revolutionized with the Industrial Revolution. Also, the growth of immigration. Now we have a lot of factories. We need to demand labor. We need cheap labor. Uh, there's issues in Europe happening. There's a bunch of starvation. There's a big potato famine in Ireland, for example. So people in Ireland from 1845 all the way to 1851, just all the potatoes in Ireland just rot, and that was the main crop food for Irish people, especially the poor people out there and the peasants out there in the rural areas. A lot of people died. Many people migrated. Uh, many people came to the U.S. Some went to Australia. It was a little different, but a lot of people came to the U.S. So Irish was a big immigrant group during this time period, 1845, 1850, 1860. I told you they lacked these industrial skills to work at the factories. They lacked the capital, finance, money to move west and settle on their own. There were mostly these Irish people that were fleeing from the potato famine were mostly impoverished peasants, right? Poor farmers. So the work as common labor, servants, and they mostly they basically were the ones that built the first railroads. They were just common laborers in urban ghettos in New York, Philly, uh, and actually talking about New York Hollywood films, uh, Gangs of New York with Leonardo DiCaprio and Daniel Day-Lewis, I think. Gangs of New York captures like the tension of the incoming of migrants, especially between Native Americans and these newcomers, this Irish, and then later the Germans as well, these newcomers. But the Irish most settled by necessity in these densely populated ghetto urban cities like New York. So Gangs of New York, I recommend that city. I mean that city. Gangs of New York, I recommend that movie to get a visual of life in cities during this time period. Um, so that was the first largest group of immigrants during this time. The second largest group was Germans of immigrants. They were, for the most part, they were skilled craftsmen. They were more skilled than the Irish. They tended to settle. They did settle in cities and tightly knit communities, little German towns. You can find these all over across the U.S., especially east. These little German towns. So there were craftsmen, shopkeepers, farmers. Right? So they were a little bit more, had a little bit more finance, more capital, and more skills. So they were not seen as lazy and dirty as the Irish. They were a little bit more in the views of Americans that were born here or that were native here to America. They were seen as more respectable migrants. Okay? Same as what happened here, right? We have the good migrants, right? The ones that come from like Japan or from Europe, and then we have the bad hombres, right? The people that come from South America and stuff, and Mexico. Those are the bad migrants. We need a wall there, but we need a wall in Canada, right? We need concentration camps to keep kids in camps, and are we here in El Paso, but not over there in Seattle or Vancouver and stuff, right? And then the third largest group of migrants was Scandinavians. And they settled the old Northwest across the Appalachians. They were just these farmers. Um, yeah, so you have these different migrant groups coming in, which spurred what we call nativism, which is still alive today. Nativism. So what is nativism? Nativism is the idea that if you're not native to the Americas, to North America, to the U.S., then you're a threat to the social fabric and the political fabric and the harmony of this nation. That's what nativism is. If you're not from here, get away. We don't want foreigners because they're a threat to us. Right? So there was a hostility. There was just being hostile to this new immigration They're taking our jobs. They have their weird uh, cultural baggage. The Irish, not just for they're lazy, right? They don't have skills, and their paupers are always begging for money, but they're Catholics, right? And goddamn, we just went like through the whole war against like Catholics, basically, right? The British and them, right? They're under the they're never going to be loyal to the U.S. because they're always going to be loyal first to the Pope. So fuck the Irish, right? Even more so than the Germans or the Scandinavians because they're Catholic, right? Um, so it's this hostility to this new immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. They blame immigrants for urban crime, political corruption, um, the fondness for liquor, the drunken Irish was always fighting. Right? That's where we get the stereotype from this time period, the 1840s, 1850s, uh, and basically taking away wages. Right? They work for less, so they're cutting away my wage. Okay, they're taking away my job. And some of it is based on some truth. I mean, these people work for less wages, right? So if you were a janitor at one of these factories and you had an Irish guy that would do the same job for less, then you got competition there, right? This is capitalism. Oh wow, right? It's not the Irish guy's fault. It should be the owner's fault who's doing that, But they took it out on the Irish, right? Same thing happening today as well. Um, Political corruption. A lot of these Irish people had no communities like the Germans, right? That were already kind of established here before or whatever. They had no social network here. They had no net, right? Safety net when they came, the Irish people. Most of them were by themselves. And if they were together, if they did have communities, they were on the same boat. Poor as fuck. Right? Super poor and low skilled in the same boat. Right in the ghettos. This overcrowded tenements in New York City. Um, so the way they would get support, the way they would get like food, basically, sometimes on the table, is that they would sell their vote. You have these democratic rings, these democratic political rings, especially the Democrats in New York City, right? That would tell these Irish, like, "Hey, come vote for me, and I'll put food on your table, and I'll give you some liquor too. I'll give you some beer, some free whiskey. Just come vote for me." Right? And that was the way that these Democrats came into power in New York City, with what we call it political rings. It's kind of like a mafia, kind of like a mob, right? They protect you, but you gotta pay them somehow, right? And the way you pay these political rings, you vote for them. Right? So yeah, these local political bosses, right? So yeah, they just kind of fueled, right, this image of the Irish as being the bad migrant, right? This nativist view, right? Um, right. So, right, the Gangs of New York, that movie, right, really illustrates these riots, these anti-immigrant riots, right? And they create gangs to help each other. It's pretty crazy. Did also happen in Philadelphia, right? In these big urban cities, right? The main ports, right? Where people would just first settle. If you had the money like the Germans and the Scandinavians, you'll move away and go west. If you didn't have money like the Irish, you were stuck there in these big cities, these ghettos. So yes. All right. What else do we talk about here? What else do I got? The death of immigration. Another big thing that happened during this time period was law change tremendously, was revolutionized. So I talked about corporations earlier. So that changed a lot. The corporate form of business organization was the main, I guess, uh, driving force, or yes, driving force behind the industrial revolution. Was central to this market economy now. So we're going away from a farming agricultural economy to a market economy. This is the whole point of this whole chapter. So corporations, uh, basically they have special privileges, special powers granted by the government. So a corporation, if it fails, those investors and the stockholders, they really don't get hurt, right? Because they get paid monthly, right? Dividends. So if a company fails, then it fails. Okay, whatever. So, but if you're like an individual on your own and it fails, it's your whole life, right? So, so basically, the corporate form of business, right? We're able to raise more capital, way more capital, for having more stockholders than traditional forms of enterprises. So the market economy, the central institution for the market economy is the corporation. So the rise of the corporation is during this time period as well. Also, important court decisions, and I'm just going to name them really quick. Dartmouth College versus Woodward. So that pretty much reified that corporates are a central institution for this nation. So Dartmouth College was a corporation, like most colleges are. And that college was granted, the charter was granted by King George III before the Revolution. But the U.S. Constitution has an amendment saying that any charter, any contract must be, that was made before the Revolution, must be respected by the new government of the U.S. Uh, but Dartmouth is, I forget what state it is in, I think in New York. They was sued by the state. It's in saying like, no, the state makes a law, like it's gonna cut that charter. It's already, it's not gonna renew it, basically, and the state's gonna control this college now. It's not gonna control itself like it used to. So they went to the Supreme Court, and we have Federalist John Marshall, Chief Justice John Marshall, and he voted in favor of Dartmouth College. It's like, no, the corporation is the contract with the corporation is more important than your state laws. Gibbons versus Ogden also kind of put a limit on the corporation, right? Was able with what they could do. So there was a big monopoly in New York about steamboats, about the shipping of steamboats, about the Hudson River, who controlled the waterways. It was the Livingstons, Robert Fulton Livingston, and Gibbons versus Ogden is one of the Supreme Court decisions that kind of cut down that monopoly that the Livingstons had there. And then you have Commonwealth versus Hunt. And this was made unions legal, labor unions. So a lot of these factory workers that were being paid low wages, increasingly more and more, and being exploited by the factory owners, began to create unions, right? Labor unions. So Commonwealth versus Hunt made labor unions legal. They used to be, they still are in some states illegal, like Texas is a right to work state, so labor unions are illegal. Oh, what the heck was that? Was that seed? All right. What am I trying to talk about here? Yeah. So we have all these changes in the economics. I'll briefly talk about changes socially and religiously. We have the Sacred Great Awakening. Um, we have a growth of religious pluralism. We have more different religious denominations. Methodism becomes one of the biggest religions denominations out there, and it's all about emphasizing individualism. You could save yourself with hard work. Uh, and this goes compatible with market economy. So you work hard enough, you can own your farm. You can own a factory. So each one of us are a free moral agent. That's what this new religious movement was all about. There were definitely limits to this pluralism or tolerance for religion. A big example of this limitation was the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So the Mormons had to flee from where they were from. They first started from New York. Um, they went to they went to from New York to Illinois, Missouri. Each one of those places they got assaulted, kicked out violently. As a matter of fact, and what was it? In Illinois, in Nauvoo, Illinois, in 1839, uh, John Smith, their leader, their prophet, was killed in a jail while he was awaiting trial for polygamy and stuff. So people didn't agree with the Mormons. So this was a period of religious tolerance and pluralism, but also there's limitations. And the story of the Mormons show you that. Okay. Um, Also, limitations. African Americans did not prosper with this industrial revolution. Right? So there was a rise to the middle class. There was a rise for some people who were able to make money, becoming managers and accountants and clerks and stuff like that. They made a pretty comfortable living. Right? They were able to create this cult of domesticity, whereas the woman stays at home and then the man makes the money. And that's a sign of respectability now. With this new market economy, not everybody works, right? The one that works is the man, and you have two different levels of the man working. You have the white collar and the blue collar, right? The white collar is the clerk, these professional positions, the managers in factories, the clerks, the accountants, uh, and they're white collar because they don't have to get dirty, so they can wear a white shirt, right? And the white collar, doesn't get dirty. But if you're an operative down in the mills and you're working with the machines, right, there's all these grease and all this dust, right? You're not gonna wear a white shirt because it's gonna get dirty. You're gonna wear a blue shirt with a blue collar, right? So the dirt doesn't look bad on you, right? So that's where we get that distinction, those categories, white collar jobs and blue collar jobs. This is the beginning of that during this time period. So African Americans are not allowed to work in factories, even they're free. For most of them are slaves to begin with, and then the ones that are free work increasingly in low-skilled uh, jobs, servants, you know, uh, basically just servants. Domestic servants was the main thing they would do. Um, Unskilled jobs, and yeah. Basically, there was a steady decline of, I guess, what you call black wealth during this time period. They got pretty much excluded from this market revolution. Women as well, right, were placed at home. Now the man has to work. So now the women back then used to have a little bit of, women were never had freedom here, but it was more pronounced here. Now you had to stay at home. Now the virtue as woman was the one that was dainty and frail and didn't work. You could have enough money not to work, had her own domestic servants, and thus could have long nails, and the only work you could do is play the piano, right, or something. But you had long nails. Without long nails, you can't really work with your hands. So that was a sign of respectability, that you're wealthy and you're free, right? That you have long nails for women. I guess it's still kind of the same, right? Also, if you did work, if you were low class, domestic servitude, or being a factory girl, basically, a mill girl. Um, what happened here was that you see what's going on here is a growing gap of income inequality. People that own the factories are becoming super, super rich, more and more rich, consolidating their power and their wealth. Wherein the blue collar, the proletarians, the workers, just are getting lower and lower wages. They're getting screwed over. This creates this whole environment, even though there's a big change, society, and politics, and economics is changing. And overall, you could say it's like progressing, right? Right? We got the steamboat, we got the railroads, you got productivity is up, but in everyday life, with people, there's a big sense of distrust among these classes. The emergence of classes now is a thing. Now we have a lower class, a middle class, and then the elite. And it's all based around this wage work, this factory work, this new conception of time. Right? Who owns the railroads? Who owns the factories? And then who works those factories? Who works for a wage? Right? So the idea of freedom here is changing. What is freedom? And freedom now is beginning to see as if you could own yourself, if you don't have to work for nobody else, then you are actually free. So you see a rise of a lot of discontent now. And this is a scene in the politics of this one man, Andrew Jackson, who's going to embody this growing sense of discontent against the wealthy. Right? And that'll be chapter 10. All right, so this is the end of this long ass lecture. I guess have a good time. Be safe.